This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture. And I want to welcome you to the City of God podcast, where we are weekly talking about today's biggest cultural issues, all through the lens of God's infallible word. I'm Rob Pacienza, and today is a very special episode because we are remembering the October 7th attacks on Israel 1 year later. And I'm joined by a very special guest here in the studio and via Zoom. First, joined by our very own Shannon Harmeling, who is our operations coordinator here at Coral Ridge Ministries. We're also joined via Zoom from Israel with Doron Keidar, who is an IDF reservist, podcaster, and co-founder of Cry for Zion. Also, we have IDF Sergeant Major Chaim Malespin, who is the co-founder of the Aliyah Return Center. And from Texas, we're joined by Pastor Brad Carignan of Uncommon Church in Euless, Texas. Thank you all for joining us on the City of God podcast. Shannon, let's start with you. You really, God has put on your heart a burden for Israel as a whole, but in particular, what happened on October 7th, 2023. And God's also put a burden on your heart for how the church and how the West as a whole has responded, or even some cases failed to respond. Tell us a little bit about why you wanted to have this conversation and why it's so important for the church, particularly the church in the West, to really understand what's happening 1 year later.
Thank you, Pastor Rob. Basically, after October 7th, or when October 7th happened a year ago, America only heard so many stories. There was a massacre. There were men, women, children just murdered brutally all throughout southern Israel there. And these are God's chosen people. This is Israel. This is the land of our King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And for me, I just felt like, what are we doing? When I read my Bible, I'm reading about the land of Israel. I'm reading about everything God is promising us in the future. And for Hamas to come into Israel the way they did, premeditated, and use all these methods of war against innocent people, it was like, why aren't we speaking up? Why aren't we screaming here in the church? And I'm not talking just in America, worldwide. Mm-hmm. Every person that believes in Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior should be appalled and should be called to action in response to Israel. We need to support them. We need to be there for them. And we need to be there for the Jewish people here in America.
Yeah.
And that was my burden.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Unfortunately, the West is often known for a very short attention span with the mainstream media on 24 hours a day and social media. It's kind of whatever the next biggest news cycle is. Yes. And I think that's why this conversation is so important. A year later, people are still suffering. Justice has not been served. Mm-hmm. And we have an important role to play in the West and the church globally. Doron, you've been an IDF reservist for many years, and you've spent 10 months on the ground operating in the Gaza campaign. Tell us a little bit about the morning of October 7th, 2023, and summarize your experience on the ground fighting against Hamas.
Yeah, so nearly a year ago, I had gotten awoken from a deep sleep. My wife had woken me up because there was explosions going on overhead. The house was shaking. And I grabbed my cell phone to check out to see the unit text, what was going on. And I saw immediately just all the horrors that had been reported by the guys in the unit, and just information overload, really like a fire hose of information from all over. And I knew immediately I had to put my family into the bomb shelter and to rush to base, grab all my gear. While rockets are still going overhead, sirens blaring, explosions in the distance. You could see smoke in the sky. And it just was a very surreal day. And then like most of us who have been in combat, we've been in combat ever since, in our reserve duty or active duty, either in the Gaza front, in the northern front, or in Judea, Samaria, also known as the West Bank.
Chaim, you're a sergeant major in the IDF, and you've been documenting your time in the war daily on YouTube videos. What is the current state? I mean, we just heard about what it was like the morning of October 7th, but what is the current state of Israel 1 year later? And why are you documenting your experience for the whole world to see?
I would say, the great question, by the way, and I love your setup there. I love the little red button. It's like an emergency button there.
Exactly.
But thank you for having me on. Yeah, I really felt that there's a lot of information that gets missed, and people are quick to forget, like Sarah mentioned, and they don't know really what's going on. Often the media can skew or twist things. And so I thought, there's nothing better than someone who's on the ground, boots on the ground, or like Doron says, man in the arena. And to be able to document that as well as give an encouragement. And I really, really try to do that, because it can be very depressing to have your family under fire for almost a year. When I started it, I had no idea it would be this long, and I still don't know how long it will be, but I just knew I had to encourage other people. That's my gifting that God's giving me, is to say a verse, read a verse over the situation. And it even has helped me to be able to compartmentalize what happened in that day, even if someone died, and to kind of give it to God, and then get into the next day after I've compartmentalized that day. So each day I have a video, and it does those three things.
Let's turn to Brad. Brad, being a pastor, first of all, thank you for your ministry, being a pastor in Texas, having family in Israel. What went through your mind on October 7th as the news started to come out of what was happening in the Middle East, coming over through the airwaves of Western television and social media? And how did you respond as both a family member and a pastor that has a deep concern for the state of Israel?
Yeah, I have, my wife's family is all in Israel. Her parents, her sister, their family, her brother, and his family. So my immediate concern was for the family. How close is whatever this is to the area that they live outside Jerusalem? And so immediately we were on the phone and, had it on every screen and tablet and, just keeping an eye on things. And then when we realized how centered and focused it was on the Gaza Strip area, which in round numbers is an hour away from where my family lives, then it was, okay, how do we respond as a church? The church would not exist, not my church, any Gentile church around the world would not exist without the Jewish people. Don't forget that Jesus himself said that he first came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And it was Paul that told the Romans that the gospel is first for the Jew, then for the Gentile. And we wouldn't have the scriptures, we wouldn't have salvation had it not been extended to the Gentile church. So I just felt an extreme debt, a gratitude, and an obligation that our church would stand in prayer, in fasting, in financial support. I actually got on an airplane 2 days later. I mean, yes, I have family, but also, our board felt that we needed some boots on the ground to do any and everything we could to help. So while everybody was flying out of Israel, I was flying into Israel and spent a few weeks doing what we could as a church to help out. So I just think it's so important that the Western church, the Gentile church, pray for, stand with, intercede for, encourage, and in every way we can bless the nation of Israel and the Jewish people. So that's what we did.
Shannon, and you responded to that call and experienced that call to action and said yes. So talk a little bit about your experience going over to Israel.
So, yes, when I found out that Pastor Brad had this trip coming up, to me, it allowed me to go see my family in Israel. It brought all the years of trying to understand why people would even want to be in Israel full circle, because it wasn't just a Sunday school story anymore. Israel was attacked. That is our Sunday school story that has now turned into a nightmare for the Jewish people. And so Pastor Brad, I started watching his sermons each week, learning more about the biblical intersection with our faith as Christians, and I realized I didn't have enough of understanding of what it meant to be a Christian and have such a deeper love for Israel. So Pastor Brad had a group of us go over. We were able to do some service work. We did some agriculture work. We put baskets together for soldiers. We did go see the Nova Music Festival site. That was the most haunting for me. And you could hear artillery going off in the background, but those were the good guys. And but each day, Pastor Brad just kind of walked us through the different aspects of the war and how it's affected Israel. And so did Doron. He also did some guiding for us as well. And I'll tell you what, I can't wait to go back to Israel, first of all. And second of all, what's extra special is when we're singing in our church services, talking about the temple of God, the city of God, talking about, the land of milk and honey. It changed how I viewed those songs and how much they meant to me, because it's a real place. Yeah. It's not just overseas. So that's what I got out of the Solidarity trip. And the last thing I would say about it is we did go into Tel Aviv at the Hostage Family Return Reunification Center. They had many displays out there. And one thing, every Jewish person or Israeli person I spoke to over there, when they said, "Why are you here?" and we're like, "We're here just to be with you," they were like, "Thank you." And they were amazed.
The ministry of presence.
Yes, that's what you called it, the ministry of presence.
That's so huge.
Thank you to you, Pastor Rob, and also to Pastor Brad for making that possible.
Doron, let me go back to you. You've talked about fighting in this grueling war, putting your life on the line every single day, only to come back home and see political pundits, even politicians, people on media labeling Israel as the villain. How is that narrative wrong, and how do you personally respond to that?
Well, the way I personally respond to it is through action. And the action that I took was I started a podcast while being active duty, which was, as far as logistically, quite a headache, to say the least. But for me, it was my outlet, as Chaim was talking about, having an outlet to process all the horrors that we saw. I actually served with Chaim's unit, helped provide security for their operation in the Nova aftermath, because his unit deals with disposals of booby traps and that kind of thing. And, when you see something like that, your soul is marred forever, to say the least. And then on top of that, there's nothing more humiliating and insulting than to see the world reaction be to blame the victim. So I just came back from a 5-day trip in Norway, combating all these lies and also observing firsthand that you have the Jewish Star of David. It's like the flag of Israel stickers, but the Star of David has been converted into a swastika. You have free Palestine from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free slogans and Palestinian flags everywhere. Not, and I didn't see not one poster about the hostages, not one poster discussing and giving another side to the story that there were Jews and Christians and Muslims of the Israeli population that have been under attack and are still under attack as we speak right now. And so my way to fight is to go and make people aware of the facts and the truth. And I had privilege to have these relationships with people in different countries, like in Norway, the head of the Democratic Party, of the Conservative Party for the Christians, and have them host me at the parliament to speak to parliament members, to talk about the truth on the ground, what I saw, what I experienced, and why are your politicians not coming to hear or to listen to us? Instead, you blame the victim. And I called them out on that. And that's the way I've been handling this insanity that I'm seeing. And thanks to Pastor Brad and you, Pastor, that in Florida, that you guys are some of those voices that are trying to speak truth, and you're doing it boldly. And I encourage you to keep doing that, to use your platforms to do that.
Absolutely. This is not a time to be silent. This is a time to speak truth to power, and we're proud to stand with the nation of Israel and defend those that are defenseless in so many ways, and to add voice to those that are voiceless. Chaim, talk a little bit about the Israeli hostages that were taken by Hamas. What happened to them, and love your opinion on what the outlook is on their return.
Wonderful. Now, just before I get into that, there is something I wanted to say concerning, some people in the West, they think if you love Israel, that means you hate Arabic people. That's totally not true. You can God loves all people and has a plan for all people. But when I was on Fox News, when I was, Newsmax, Rebel Nation, different stuff, CBN, I was on CBN. This reoccurring theme stuck with me, which is good shepherds. We follow a good shepherd. I said this on Fox News. We follow a good shepherd, but we also have to be good shepherds. And a good shepherd isn't just feeding the sheep of the house of Israel. It's not just feeding them, it's protecting them. It's thy rod and thy staff comfort me. You have to have your rod, and you have to stand up. When you see that lion, you see that wolf, you see that bear, like King David. There's so many examples of good shepherds. And I feel that people have been projecting like crazy what they might think in their Western mind onto the Arabic peoples, instead of really reading what they actually are about. For example, 1987, you have Hamas founded. The charter came out in 1988, and it says, we want to establish an ISIS, an Islamic state, all throughout Israel, not next to. And so people don't even talk about this. They just say, oh, maybe they want like more Starbucks. Maybe they want more jobs. They had great jobs. They had great things. Reject all peace negotiations with Israel, and call for jihad and murder of Jewish people as the means to achieve that goal. And I don't think people know this. The Houthis, the people think, oh, maybe they just want to stand in solidarity or help, or no, their flag is written. You can translate it. It says, God is great, death to America, death to Israel, curse be upon the Jews, victory to radical Islam. Hezbollah charter, called the Open Letter, released in 1985, it talks about, kicking out any Western influence, establishing an Islamic state like ISIS, a caliphate throughout, and complete surrender to Ayatollah Khomeini or Khamenei. And so this is what they are about. And people think, and it's an expansionist, it's a colonization. It's a colonization. They don't care what the Egyptians used to be, what the people in Afghanistan used to be, what the people in Iraq used to be. It's just, no, we're going to dominate and export the revolution from Iran, essentially. And so when you talk about the hostages, it's a trick that Sinwar learned, when the Gilad Shalit. Now, my brother was friends with Gilad Shalit, who was a hostage that was taken years and years ago. And we knew about these tunnels. We didn't know about how many tunnels, but we knew about a lot of these tunnels that were used for attack, for logistical things, to make bombs underground, and to cages to hold hostages, innocent babies, women, elderly, Holocaust survivors, and hold them there as bargaining chips and human shields and so on. And so that's what Noir learned, and that's what he carried out, right when Doron was mentioning the horrors of the people on paragliders, machine guns, RPGs, burning people alive. 1,300 people massacred, which in America would be like how many, 20 9/11s or something in the equivalent amount of people that America has versus Israel. So now you mentioned about the hostages. So we set out, and I remember weeping, and I made a song. Actually, I was just crying, and I said, "We will not leave you in the dungeons of darkness and despair. We will turn over every single stone in that sandbox of Gaza until we find you, my brothers, and sisters." My good friend that serves me in Yahalom, that's my unit, Yahalom, which is, it's like SWAT, so special missions. It's the Combat Engineer Corps for elite Combat Engineer Corps for special missions, like tunnel warfare and a bomb defusal and atomic, biological, chemical, many different things. I said, "How do you feel about this?" And my friend, he said, "How do I feel? I feel like my own sister is there being raped underground. I feel my own brother, because we're a tribe. And my own brother is being tortured. My own brother." I said, "Is your own brother there?" He said, "No." It's just the metropolises, the great big cities don't get the familial tribal nature of the whole Middle East, including Israel, where you feel that. So just to answer your question, is the army has been successful, people maybe forgot, to rescue some hostages, like the Nuseirat rescue operation in June, rescuing 4 hostages, including Noah, who's there in New York. I mean, not there, in New York, Noah Argamani, and 3 other guys. I remember the vehicle was hit in the gearbox. Like Doron does this kind of stuff, getting the people in and out, and the gearbox got shot by the Kalashnikov rifles, and they were stuck there. And then suddenly the Air Force came and started bombing like crazy. They managed to make it out and rescue these. Ori Megadish, if you recall, from northern Gaza. She was a soldier. Operation Arnon. I'm just going to summarize. There's many that have been rescued, but with Yossi Argamani, Mayor Yan, Oleg Kozlov, Uri Ziv. Hey, you remember when the Argentinian president came and prayed at the Temple Mount at the wall?
Yes.
And he's Argentinian, and he's a go-getter. He always carries a chainsaw with him. Kind of interesting. Anyway, right after he prays, Millet, his name is Millet, you have the rescue of these 2 Argentinians in Operation Arnon. And so it's just like, I feel that's somehow connected. He was weeping at the wall in Jerusalem, at the Wailing Wall, at the Western Wall. And then these 2 Argentinians got rescued right after. But my point is, there has been significant effort, not as much success as we would have wanted. Doesn't mean we haven't tried to say, let's release them in ceasefires. October 13th, let's get a ceasefire going. They wanted, and they broke it right away within hours in October 13, 2023. October 20th, Qatar came and mediated a ceasefire, and Biden and everybody's on the phone. The negotiations broke down because they wanted ridiculous things that made no sense. November 24th. Anyway, I could just say there's like 5 or 6 ceasefires, and they broke some of them. They listed ridiculous things, and they didn't want a ceasefire. They wanted to use their bargaining chips to release, just like what was done in the Gilad Shalit deal, 1,000 terrorists per hostage. That's what we did because we care for life so much. And so that's my brief answer.
No, it's super helpful. You know, I think what's so important about this conversation is, unfortunately, with media bias, there is that narrative a year later that this is a war between good and good, or good versus good. The sympathy and the empathy that is shown towards Hamas. But I'm going to toss it back to you, Doron. Tell our audience a little bit about how does Hamas operate? You know, the stories of using civilians as human shields and really help to correct the narrative that this is not a war between good versus good, but really a war between good versus evil.
Yeah. So the sad reality is that so I'm 20 plus years in service in the IDF, and over 2 decades ago, we pulled out of Gaza in 2005. And so I know what Gaza looked like before the pullout from the Gaza Strip, where you had normalized relationships with Palestinians, something that I know saying that today sounds almost an impossibility, but that wasn't the case. We had work relations. We had families that we knew that we could rely on not to resort to terrorism, etc. And unfortunately today, the Gaza that I've seen today since post-October 7th operations in Gaza and being that nearly 20 years later back in Gaza since I'd been there before, the place is completely different. Everyone has been radicalized, from toddlers, as the first words they can say out of their mouths, they're taught to hate Jews, to want to kill Jews. You have board games that we found. You have propaganda through school books. Through every part of the culture is just marred with brainwashing propaganda. You combine that with radical Islamist teachings, and you have the perfect combination to create these demon-minded individuals who literally have no soul left, unfortunately, and I don't think most of them can even differentiate between real good and real evil. It's like when you speak with these people, it's almost like they don't have a soul. And it's something that is very hard for me even to say this, because I've never wanted to believe anything like that about my enemy, like they believe about me. But again, firsthand contact with hundreds of prisoners that we were in contact with, and you just see the way they're just cold. And when being interrogated about the actions they committed, I know that we met one guy that had kept a memento of a young girl, the lock of her hair, that he had raped, and kept that as a memory. And so that's the kind of information that you get from these people, and they just tell it to you as matter of fact. And then, of course, I believe Chaim has way more experience through his unit's missions, since mine is much less involved with getting into every nook and cranny of Gaza. So he can also verify what I'm saying. But basically, from what I've seen, is schools, UN facilities, mosques, bedrooms to little girls. Because you can tell by the wall and what's on it, you have openings to tunnels and tunnel systems, where essentially you have over 640 kilometers of underground tunnel systems in an area that's only 42 kilometers long and maybe roughly about 14 kilometers wide at its widest. So just to give you a little bit of math of how insane it is. And that's really what we found ourselves being up against, is literally a network that has its fingers and its tentacles in every part of society, and not to mention also tactically. And then how does the United Nations get away with trying to critique us is unbelievable. The fact that anyone takes the United Nations seriously today, post October 7th, where we had also discovered and made it public, over 2,000 terrorists, Hamas terrorists, on the payroll for the United Nations in Gaza. And the list goes on. This is just to give you the brief tip of the iceberg of the kind of things that we encountered.
It's amazing. Chaim, anything you want to add to what we just heard concerning Hamas?
Completely concur with what Doron just said. I mean, if you go to, I myself was in a radiology department of a hospital, myself personally, found a tunnel there. A tunnel used, now you might say, well, maybe some tunnels are just for storing food in the pantry. I don't know, No, these are terror tunnels used to drag innocent people to their death. And how did these cages get there? These cages, did they just magically appear there? They were constructed over a long, long time. I'm kind of surprised that they didn't actually use so much of the attack tunnels in the actual October 7th when they kidnapped 251 people. It was actually just going through the fence, and we had a huge, colossal failure. And how did they even happen? We could talk about that. But I'm realizing that they've been planning something huge for decades. And I totally agree with Doron when he says the youth, when we exited in 2005, exited Gaza, even taking the bodies out, Jewish graves, that's not the way we like to do, is to remove a Jewish person that's dead. And we like to honor our dead. But so we took the bodies out of Gaza, released Gaza, completely from any kind of Jewish people, army, civilians, 21 villages. There's actually a museum called the Gush Katif Memorial. And it was a thriving thing there. It was together. But you see what happened is those kids, they were kids at that time. And those are the ones we're fighting now. It's 18 years later. And those kids are now adults, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And they are the ones with more rocket launchers and mortars. And so I just think people need to recognize what is going on behind the scenes. Like right now, people might be thinking Israel's warmongering. Israel wants war. We do not want war. Doron's tired. I'm tired. I got kids, 3 kids. Doron has kids. We don't want to fight anyone. But, by God, we're not going to let our whole country be overrun. And neither would you. Neither would anyone. And that's why I think what frustrates me the most is we've been in Gaza before in war. In 2014, we've been in Cast Lead. We've been in, you name it. We've been in many, many operations. But what really hurts me, and to agree with what Doron said, is that people, every single major city of the free Western world, Sweden, Norway, US, Canada, I mean, every capital had such massive amount of people just pro-Hamas, just without understanding. They don't even know what they're saying. And that didn't happen as much in other wars. And right now, I'm really wondering what's going to happen as the IDF has just completed right now 60 strikes on Hezbollah targets, and now called up 2 reserve brigades for the operation in the northern arena just now. I mean, this is right now for ground operations. Major General Ori Gordon, he said there's going to be some ground maneuvers, boots on the ground, and I assume that we'll be getting rid of these rocket launchers, and they're called Shmuot Teva. I do expect that some of the tunnels they have are going to be used. People have been hearing digging, and some of the tunnels have been found, but digging, drilling underneath northern communities, and I wouldn't doubt that they're going to be used to try to get more hostages from Hezbollah, I'm saying now. I hope not, but we need to stand together before the world is overrun and before it's too late for the world, I'm talking about now.
Shannon, anything to add concerning Hamas?
Yes. As a woman, Hamas, one of the most delicate parts of any country is our mothers, our sisters, daughters, grandmothers, aunts. And Hamas used sexual violence against women on October 7th. There's a documentary, Screams Before Silence, which I've watched a few times, by Sheryl Sandberg. And she interviewed several women. She interviewed some Zaka first responders, people that had to go in and try to piece together body parts of women, even men. But the women, it was a systematic thing. One of the Zaka men on there that was being interviewed said that it's a systematic way. It's weaponizing sexual violence against women, against a nation, and humiliation, mutilation. And then, unfortunately, we have to be aware that Hamas, they sent people in there screaming Allah Akbar, using a garden hoe to try to behead a Jewish man. I saw that video just 2 weeks ago from another documentary, and I was just blown away, because I can't imagine, Christian or not, Jewish or not, if I'm lying on the ground and I see a screaming terrorist screaming to his God of death, beheading me. What a way to die. And that was just one of 1,300 some people. So Hamas, we talk a lot about military here, but they're Satan in true form. They're walking demons, and the people that are, supporting them, the people supporting them in the United States of America, shame on you.
No, that's good. That's good, and that teed it up perfectly. Because that's good. Because I wanted to get Pastor Brad's perspective on this, as a pastor that has a heart for Israel, a pastor ministering in the United States. Brad, I don't need to tell you, we have just seen episode after episode of college protests, college students protesting on their university campuses in support of the Hamas terrorist. I'd love to get your perspective on that, and how you're responding in light of the outrageous protest in support of Hamas.
Well, personally, I flew up to Columbia University and walked the grounds, and I stood not in opposition, but I just wanted to be on the other side of the protest line, and just see and experience and listen. And the irony is, these young people have been completely duped by the TikTok media conglomerate, and they have believed a lie. I think that they think they are in the right. I think that they do not have a clue. They are wildly misinformed and underinformed. And if they really understood who it is that they are marching for and protesting for, they would be ashamed. And I think maybe one day they'll realize how wicked and evil Hamas is, and that they picked the wrong side of this fight. So part of it was just complete. I felt bad, because they don't realize that most of these people would be beheaded and dragged through the streets of Gaza City if they were actually on the ground trying to stand with Hamas. As a church, as Christians, Pastor Rob, you said it yourself, in America, we have extremely short attention span when it comes to the media. A significant media event can happen anywhere in the world, and we're only captivated for one news cycle. And by the next day, we just want to know who won The Voice the night before. So we as Christians have to be better informed. We can't only rely on Western media outlets, Fox News, MSNBC, CNN. They're only going to briefly give a story with a bias either right or left. And then the next day, they want to sell more advertising, so they've already moved on to the next story. It's important for Christians to know what the Bible says. So many Christians are completely ignorant to the scriptures. And I don't just mean the few scriptures that specifically talk about Israel and the church. I mean Genesis to Revelation. The story about Israel starts in Genesis chapter 1. So we have to be much better informed as believers and really spend time in our word and daily reading the word and involved in Bible studies and small groups at church and taking notes every Sunday morning when the pastor is speaking, because there is so much truth in the scriptures, and especially how it deals with Israel. If you just need a little bit of homework, I would highly recommend slowly reading Romans chapter 9, 10, and 11. You have to remember that the church was really starting to take ground in Rome and in Roman culture. And the Apostle Paul said he was the Jewish apostle to the Gentile church, but he warned them not to become proud, not to think that the church is all about the Gentiles, that it's really all about the Jewish people, that they are the root, this olive tree that sustains the Gentile church. And we can't be proud. We have to be grateful, and we owe a debt of gratitude. It's fascinating that the Apostle Paul himself said, I would be willing to be cut off from that tree. He's basically saying, I would be willing to go to hell if it meant that the Jewish people would see Jesus as Messiah. So I would recommend following some Israeli news sources. I mean, yes, there are some conspiracy theorist, underground news sources. You can follow the big ones like J-Post, Haaretz, I-24 News, the Times of Israel, and they're going to give you a much better perspective of what's happening in Israel. So know your Bible, know what's actually happening in current events in the media, and then be willing to stand up and say something. Speak truth in love. Because it's like what Chaim said, we're not against the Muslim people. We're not against the Arab people. Jesus died for me as much as he died for a member of Hamas or Hezbollah. But our prayers need to be for the protection of the nation of Israel and for this evil, this wickedness to be destroyed. I would love for Hamas and Hezbollah to lay down their weapons, put up a white flag, walk to the border, surrender themselves and repent of their sin and make Jesus the Lord of their life. And if they're unwilling to do that, then there might need to be military action. So that's my call to the church, is to become much better informed biblically and in the media.
Pastor Brad, that's so helpful. Pray, get better informed. Shannon, I'm going to toss it back to you as we wrap up this important conversation. What else, in addition to what Pastor Brad said just so well as a call to action for the church, particularly in the West, what are some specific practical things our audience can be doing a year later to voice and to demonstrate their support for Israel?
Absolutely. Thank you. Basically, what we can do is we can continue speaking truth to power. We can speak truth to the lies. We can educate ourselves. The International Christian Embassy Jerusalem has a presentation that can come to churches and train you about your role as a Christian with regards to Israel. There's so many organizations right now out there that people can do practical things with. You can go to Cry for Zion and do support through their site. You can go to the Aliyah Return Center. And I know that we're going to do more with this and provide those resources for our viewers. And the last thing I would say is talk to your Jewish friends. Call the local Jewish Federation and find out what they're doing. October 7th is going to have a lot of memorials going on throughout the nation. And if you weren't a part of one of those, then find out what is next and prepare for the next year. So that's what I would say. Don't just be a prayerful spectator, but actually get out there and do something that you can look back on your life and say, I wasn't silent when this was going on. So that would be my advice, Pastor Rob.
No, and I think that's such an important word. This is not a time to be silent. This is a time to be vocal. Yes. It's a time to respond in not just word, but in deed.
Yes.
And just on this anniversary of the just horrendous attack on innocent civilians and the nation of Israel. This is a time where the people of God globally need to come together and make their voice heard. Shannon, Chaim, Doron, Pastor Brad, thank you so much. No, we stand with you. We are praying for you. We are praying for the peace of Israel, and know that you have brothers and sisters all around the world that stand with you in support. And we're going to do our part to make sure that band of brothers and sisters continues to expand. Thank you so much for being with us today on this very special episode on the 1-year anniversary of the October 7th attacks. And that's all the time we have on this very special episode of the City of God podcast. If you are encouraged or inspired, I don't know how you couldn't be encouraged or inspired by today's episode. We pray that you would pass it along to family members, friends, any individuals that want to respond in real tangible ways to the crisis in Israel 1 year later. We pray that band of brothers and sisters would continue to expand across the world to show our support for the nation of Israel. Thank you once again for tuning in to the City of God podcast, and we'll see you back here next week. God bless. The City of God podcast is produced by Coral Ridge Ministries and made in partnership with the Institute for Faith and Culture. Visit us at cityofgodpodcast.com to access all of our previous episodes. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or anywhere you get podcasts. A full video version of this podcast is available on YouTube. This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture.